And cool. I think we are probably about good to go. So, as I said, everybody, welcome back to another workshop, the second workshop of the day. So, we're really grateful to have you all join us. Before I kind of kick off and hand over to Patrick, I'd once again like to highlight the fantastic opportunity of joining the Arbitrum Foundation and their university fleet. As I've said previously, this is a great opportunity for you to lead virtual and in-person meetups. You'll be able to create your own content and just generally grow your own personal network. So once I hand over to Patrick and get the session started, I will drop a link in the chat as always, and I'd really encourage you to take a look at that. Also, for those of you who are looking for inspiration for your projects, we have also just added some amazing project ideas to the Arbitrum bounties. So again, I'd encourage you to take a look at our website at the Hacker Pack, and you'll find some great inspiration for your projects, which you can build. And finally, just one more reminder, our workshop session tomorrow has been replaced by a team formation session. So for anyone still looking for some remaining team members, it's a great opportunity for you to network within this cohort of university hackers and potentially find your future teammates. But that's everything from me. So I'd love to hand over to Patrick, who's going to give us all an amazing overview of the Arbitrum DAO and just more generally how you can get involved. So Patrick, thank you very much for joining us, and I'd love to hand over to you.
Microphone. So can you guys hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, let's try that. And you can still hear me. Okay, I think I've got around it then. Okay, GM, everyone. GM, I hope you're all doing well. So I'll just take it from here. Let's do it. Let me share my screen. Cool. So as Roy mentioned, what I'm going to talk about today is the Arbitrum DAO and Arbitrum Governance. And just a little bit about myself. I recently joined the Arbitrum Foundation. We're about three months old, so still quite a young org. And I mostly focus on research and education. Although, given that we're still a very small org, I've been spending a lot of time doing governance and working with our delegates in the DAO. So hopefully fostering a good environment for everyone to get involved. And if you have any questions whatsoever during this talk, just drop it in the chat, and I'm more than happy to answer your questions. And yeah, I'll highlight the ambassador program as well at the end, plus the grant program, just in case anyone here needs a grant to build something really cool. So let's get started then. So I guess what I'm going to focus on today are three different topics. What's the journey been for Arbitrum leading up to, Arbitrum governance? Like, why do we even have governance? Why should we care about it? Then I want to talk about why we should care about the Arbitrum DAO. Now, this is my first time ever working with a DAO. I've been around for a very long time, but I've never had to work with a DAO before. And so previously I was very skeptical about DAOs, but now I can fully appreciate why they're necessary. So hopefully we'll go through that journey as well and understand why we should care about it. And then finally, what's the relationship between the Arbitrum DAO and the Arbitrum Foundation where I work? What does that relationship look like, and how should we, think about how we're going to interact with each other in the future? So let's talk about the journey of Arbitrum. And just as a reminder to everyone, I joined Arbitrum 3 months ago, but I'm a researcher. I've historically been an academic, and I've very much followed I've very much followed the path of most of the rolled out projects. So I'm quite familiar about most of their origin stories and how they've came about. And so this is more like a third-party observation of how I've witnessed Arbitrum evolve over the years. And the first part is 2015. So Ed Felton was a professor at Princeton, and he had some students work on a project called Arbitrum. And if anyone remembers 2015, that was a notable year because that was the launch of Ethereum. So back in 2015, he was working on what was called Arbitrum at the time, but it was really just a fraud-proof system. So, given one computer and given a supercomputer that can do a lot of work, how could we convince the small computer if the computation was done incorrectly? How do you form a fraud proof? And that line of work is called verifiable computing. Either use zero-knowledge proofs or use fraud proofs, but it's very much this verifiable computing. And that's what they were working on back then. How do you implement fraud proofs? I don't think they were targeting Ethereum because Ethereum didn't exist at the time. It was literally just launching. But the idea of fraud proofs is very much what Arbitrum is built on. And again, guys, ask as many questions as you want. I love good questions. If anything, your goal is to make sure I don't finish my slides. That's happened once or twice. So yeah, ask as many questions as you want. But basically, 2015 student experiment. That was Arbitrum's first time being alive. And then 2 years later, Stephen and Harry were both PhD students at Princeton, and they worked with Ed alongside other co-authors to basically, take the owl, the circles, and to draw the owl. And that came up with the Arbitrum paper, where they basically designed the initial version of Arbitrum. And actually, that paper is very similar to Arbitrum Antitrust today. And we can talk about that later. That's basically a very similar design to how Antitrust works. This was in 2017. And does anyone remember what happened in 2017 as well? 2017 was when everyone discovered Plasma. So if you consider the layer 2 roadmap, we went from side chains to Plasma to rollups. And 2017 was the time when the Arbitrum paper was released. And of course, when the Plasma paper came out by both Joseph Poon and Vitalik. So again, rollups weren't even known back then, but Arbitrum was working along the same sort of lines of, they weren't actually targeting Plasma, but again, how do you build something like, how do you build a virtual machine and do fraud proofs on top of that? And that's what Arbitrum was about. And then 2019, I remember watching this. I was a professor at the time, and I saw that Stephen, Ed, and Harry had gone to do a startup based on Arbitrum. They created a company called Off-Chain Labs, and they raised some seed funding for this. What's also notable about 2019, so as they're getting fundraising to build Arbitrum into production, 2019 is when rollups were discovered. So Barry Whitehat released a GitHub repo called the Rollup that basically led to all the future rollup models that we have today. I think that repo was to do with payments, but the key insight was that we could take data and post it on Ethereum and use Ethereum as a data availability layer. That simplified the design space for Plasma and of course led to what we know as rollups today. But at the same time, Arbitrum raised money to finally go build Arbitrum. So that's really cool just to see these notable timelines. Now by 2021, I'm sure I can't really see anyone here. I normally ask people to raise their hands if they were around for the launch of Arbitrum 1. There you go, But what's really notable is that after 6 years, going from an idea in 2015 about verifiable computing to 2017 to releasing the paper and demonstrating how this works for a virtual machine, to 2019 to raising the funds and the money and kickstarting the startup, to 2021 to actually launching the network. Now, of course, this looks like a straight arrow path, but I know from 2019 to 2021, they had a lot of different pivots and maneuvers until they eventually landed on Arbitrum 1 as a roll-up on top of Ethereum. And that's very normal and very healthy for a startup to do. So if you're doing a startup, never fear pivots. If anything, you don't want sunken cost. You want to keep pivoting until you hit the product market fit, and that's what they did here. And of course, they raised more money just before the launch of mainnet. Now, the reason why I care about all of this is that by 2023, March of this year, of course, I normally ask people to raise their hand if they've got any of the airdrop around that time, is that this led to the birth of Arbitrum DAO and the foundation, and of course, the constitution as well. And the whole point of the DAO is to govern the live deployments of Arbitrum 1 and Arbitrum Nova. Now, the reason why this is a big deal is that you have these three founders, especially Ed, who's been working on this now for 6 years. Or how long is that? That's 8 years, isn't it? 2015 to 2023, 8 years or so. And what they did was that they built this billion-dollar company with this cool live deployment of software that has a lot of value on and a lot of users. They took away their baby of their startup and they gave it away to the community. Like, how many tech giants would do that? Like, how many tech giants can you imagine would give away the core technology of their startup and of their company and then give it away to a DAO, which is basically like us, random people on the internet, to govern and protect this software? To me, that makes crypto. That is a very special thing about our industry and our community. But that's the birth of the DAO. That is how the DAO emerged and evolved. And of course, as I mentioned, we have the DAO, which is a collection of token holders, and of course, the Arbitrum Foundation. And our job is to represent the DAO and Arbitrum. And the way I like to think about it is that the DAO is the brain that makes decisions, and the foundation are the hands. We're operative. So if the DAO makes a decision, It's our job and our role to help them execute on that decision as a firm. That's our job, is to support the DAO with their decision making. And of course, to help inform them about the pros and the cons of their decisions as well. We're an advisor to the DAO, and we're there to support the DAO. But let's first focus on the DAO. Why should we care about the Arbitrum DAO? I'm sure maybe people want to write in the chat, are you a skeptic of a DAO? Maybe write in the chat, yes, I'm a skeptic. No, I'm not a skeptic of a DAO. I don't know if anyone wants to write there, but if they do, then yeah, there you go. We got Carl. Yes, he's a skeptic. That's awesome. Okay, we got one skeptic at least. Thank you, Carl. So I was always a skeptic of DAOs. I was a bit like, why would you care about DAOs for? And then obviously I joined the foundation. And my first question at the foundation was, why do we have a DAO? And I spent a lot of time thinking about this of, what does the DAO serve? What is its purpose? So let's step back a bit and think of an analogy. And this is how I've been reasoning about why DAOs are useful. So let's consider publicly available code, not even open source code, just publicly available code. What's really nice about publicly available code is that anyone can visit the GitHub, anyone can read the code, and anyone can figure out how the code works. That's fine. Maybe you find a bug. You read the code, you're like, oh, there's a bug here. What you can do is you can submit a pull request to the repo to fix the bug. And then a list of code maintainers code owners, they can read your PR and they can either decide to merge it and fix the bug, or they could ignore it and just not merge your PR. But there's code owners here who manage the code and manage the contributions. And finally, what's really cool about publicly available code is that anyone can download the code and anyone can run the code as well. Do you want to run a private network using Go Ethereum? Here's the instructions from their repo. You can download the code and have as many deployments of this software as you want. So that's really cool. That's open source code in a nutshell, or at least publicly available code. But what if there's only one meaningful deployment of the software? Like Arbitrum 1. There's only one Arbitrum 1 out there. There's only one meaningful deployment. So how do we govern that? GitHub's no good anymore. GitHub doesn't work to manage a live deployment of the software and even decide how do we upgrade this software as well as a collective. So that's the one big question. Who's authorized to propose and execute an upgrade to the live instance of the software? And this isn't a problem unique to Arbitrum. Bitcoin, Ethereum, Polygon, Optimism, Immutable, Solana, every network out there has this issue of governance, of who has the right to decide how to upgrade the software. So how have we solved this over the years? And basically, everyone's always working towards the idea of being decentralized for governance. But the first approach is that you have a centralized authority. Every project has to be bootstrapped. There has to be some authority out there that decides, okay, we've kickstarted this new project. We need to rapidly agree to these upgrades. Bitcoin started this way. So this is the old, this is a screenshot of the old Source Forge that Satoshi Nakamoto used when he was deciding, what code is running on the Bitcoin network. So he would update the client, and then because it's a very small network, he would basically tell everyone to upgrade your software to the new client on this repo. But it was centralized. It was a centralized authority deciding what software was running the network. And all the rollups are the same. Off-chain labs for a long time basically got to decide what software was being run in Arbitrum. The Nitro upgrade was coordinated by them. So every project starts off as centralized in this sense. But then you want to decentralize it, and how do you do that? So in the world of Bitcoin and Ethereum, they rely on a process called rough consensus. And rough consensus is a bit like a hot potato. No one wants to take responsibility of how they govern Bitcoin or Ethereum. They want to be maximally decentralized as much as they can and opaque in their process as well. So, they take the problem of the upgrade and they pass it around to every party who's involved. And eventually everyone agrees that they should do the upgrade. But the way they do this, and the language they use is very particular. So what happens is that the nodes on the network and the stakers or the miners and the stakeholders, everyone will issue a signal to the network. They'll signal to say, I want this upgrade to happen and I'm ready for it. And then what the network will do as a collective is that once there's enough signals on the network, let's say 95% of the hash rate or 95% of the stakers, once they've all signaled and we can verify that they've actually signaled that they want this upgrade to happen, then the code will have a flag day. It will say, yes, we can all verify that most of the network wants this upgrade to happen. Now, 2 weeks later, once we've got the signal, the flag day is on this certain date and time. And that's when the upgrade will be triggered. And then on that day, the upgrade happens. And if everyone's in agreement, then everyone just follows the new rules. If there's disagreement on what the upgrade should be, then the network forks. And we've saw that before with Bitcoin, Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, Ethereum Classic, where people disagreed on the upgrade, and so the two communities went their separate ways with two different live deployments effectively. But that's how rough consensus works. You issue a signal to the network. If enough people agree, everyone then decides a flag day, and then the flag day is the test, where you can really check if everyone agreed and if everyone's really, really ready for that upgrade. But this doesn't work for rollups. And the reason it doesn't work for rollups is because a rollup, or at least in the case of Optimism, Arbitrum, and all these Ethereum-based rollups, is that there's a smart contract living on Ethereum that holds all of the assets. So today, the Arbitrum bridge probably, I always forget the number, let's say they have $4 billion in assets. You can't fork a smart contract. You can fork a blockchain network like Bitcoin and Ethereum, but the bridge, the Arbitrum bridge on Ethereum, you'd have to fork Ethereum itself. So we can't use that approach of rough consensus for a smart contract-based rollup. So instead, what we need is direct voting or explicit voting. And that's what basically leads to the DAO, where all the token holders, if you're a token holder, you have the right to cast a vote. If enough people vote for a proposal, then it will go through a process on chain to upgrade the smart contracts and effectively upgrade the system. And so DAOs are basically just a way to facilitate direct voting, where everyone who's a token holder has the right to vote and decide how to upgrade this software. Now, this isn't unique to DAOs. So Tezos was the first blockchain to implement something like this. So this article is from 2019, where the bakers cast a vote. I mean, the bakers voted together the upgrade parameters. I think it was like the configuration of Tezos via an on-chain voting process. So Tezos led the way for this. I think it's very important to acknowledge that. But now DAOs are really taking that idea of on-chain voting and running with it. And of course, that's what Arbitrum does today. We have this on-chain, and in fact, we go even further. We have a on-chain set of smart contracts that we call the governance smart contracts that automates, it facilitates the voting, and then it enforces the upgrade on-chain. We're going to talk about that very soon, because Arbitrum, to the best of my knowledge, is the only rollup project with on-chain governance that actually is executed on-chain as well without the use of a multi-sig. So I think that's really exciting. But just to highlight, towards decentralized governance, most projects start off centralized. Then you've got to decide, can you use rough consensus or can you rely on explicit voting? And that would really depend on the type of system that you deploy. But for rollups and for DAOs, explicit on-chain voting is probably the most, I don't want to say the only way, it's the current way how they do it. Proof of governance. John Sharp has a really great talk on proof of governance at the MEV Day in Paris. I think it was the modular summit. So I recommend to go watch his talk around proof of governance. It's very much about the explicit voting process. But anyway, we're going to talk about explicit voting now, because the other two doesn't really matter at this point, because we don't have rough consensus and we no longer have a centralized authority that decides upgrades on Arbitrum. So wait, voting. So if you have a voting protocol, does that impact the security of Arbitrum? And what's really important to highlight is that every blockchain system today has two forms of security, or two different threat models that we have to think about. The whole point of something like proof of work, proof of stake, fraud proofs, validity proofs, the whole point of the protocol is for the day-to-day operation of the system. So day to day, the software and the protocol protects the network and protects the assets locked in the system. And for a rollup, for the day-to-day operation, we don't need to prioritize size. We don't need 400,000 validators to protect Arbitrum, because we have Ethereum that does that already. We can use Ethereum lean on it as this decentralized platform, and we can take advantage of the fact that they have 400,000 validators. So for a rollup, when you think about the day-to-day security of a rollup, it's really about prioritizing access. What we need to prioritize is that there's one honest party out there who can step up, submit a transaction to the bridge, and protect the entire system. And so that's what we mean for day-to-day operation for security for a rollup. We just have this one honest party. Yes, Carl, so exactly, we have to rely on an external validator. So we can call this the one honest party. We need one honest validator out there who will step up, submit the fraud proof, and protect the system. In the case of like a ZK rollup or a validity rollup, you have to rely on an honest party to come along, submit a proof, and help the system progress, because otherwise it will halt. So for us, it's safety and liveness. For a ZK rollup, it's just liveness. Will the rollup keep making progress? But exactly, I think you get the point exactly. We just need one external validator to protect the system. And it's setting it up so that I think anyone could do this long term. We just need one honest party to do it. So then the second part of it, when you think about the security of a rollup or just a blockchain system in general, is governance. So the whole point of governance is, one, what happens if the day-to-day operation fails or breaks down? So we've saw this on Bitcoin and Ethereum. There's been a bug in the software client that led to a split on the network. For example, on Bitcoin, I think it was early on 2010, 180 billion Bitcoin was printed. Clearly that's a problem. We can't have 180 billion Bitcoin out there. We've also seen forks in Ethereum where there was a consensus bug and it led to a fork in two blockchains, temporarily. So when the software breaks down or there needs to be a software upgrade, that's where governance comes in. And governance is the ultimate backstop that protects a blockchain system and protects a rollup. Because rollups are just a blockchain system. So for governance, what you really want to prioritize is diversity and size. You want to maximize who's involved in governance, or at least all the different stakeholders who care about this network have a right or some input to how the system gets upgraded. Or if the operation fails, everyone can then come together and fix the problem so that the software can continue protecting the system. So yes, on-chain voting does impact the security of Arbitrum, but that's the governance module of it, and it's very necessary to the overall security of the network. And again, this is the same for any blockchain system out there. So cool.
Learning how to choose the right audio apps for you.
Oh, sorry, Siri's talking to me. Wants me to look at Apple Music. Sorry, I also have a broken slide. Forgot to fix that. So the next part is, so if you have this on-chain voting protocol and you have this diverse population for governance, then what DAOs facilitate is this explicit governance. It's a transparent process for community members to decide how to upgrade the software, and then they can vote on that as well. But then what should a DAO vote on? So now we're talking about voting protocols. We're talking about DAOs. What do they actually vote on? So in my mind, and I'm sure people have different opinions on this, but for me, the whole point of the Arbitrum DAO, their key mission is, one, they're the defender of Arbitrum. They're the defender of the assets locked in the Arbitrum bridge. It is up to the DAO to ultimately protect the network. And of course, if there's an upgrade, both on-chain or off-chain, let's say an upgrade to the sequencer, upgrade to the validator, or an upgrade to the on-chain smart contracts, that's really up to the Arbitrum network or Arbitrum DAO to decide. They need to evaluate every proposal, ensure that audits are done on the code, and then eventually, if they want to, they can approve the upgrade as well. But that's very much the whole point of the DAO, is to defend the Arbitrum network. A second purpose, in my mind, is equally important. Maybe, I don't know. I'm more of a security guy. I think being a defender is the most important role for the DAO. But they have this other role of managing the treasury. So the DAO and Arbitrum, they hold 35% of all the Arbitrum tokens, which, as you can imagine, is a very significant treasury to give for a DAO. And it's up to the DAO to decide how they spend these funds, or how they distribute these governance tokens out to anyone who wants to participate. And so that could be, so right now, for example, there's 2 grant programs that have been approved by the DAO, funded from this treasury. So anyone in this room can come along, submit a proposal to the DAO, as we're going to see. And if the DAO approves it, you can get access to some of this treasury and then run with your proposal. So ideally, it should be spent improving the Arbitrum network, or of course, helping encourage people to build on top of Arbitrum as well and the developer ecosystem. But really, that's down to the DAO. They can decide what they want to do with it. And when you submit a proposal to the Arbitrum DAO, there's two different styles of proposals. The first is a non-constitutional AIP. So basically, you have a funding request, or you want the DAO to agree to some guidelines or some code of conduct. That would be a non-constitutional AIP. And that's probably going to be the type of AIP most people post, because I assume most of these proposals will be funding requests. The second type of AIP is a constitutional AIP. And the point of a constitutional AIP is when you want, so the Arbitrum DAO is governed by an Arbitrum constitution that really sets out, the rules for how they engage. If you want to update the constitution, you can submit a proposal that will update the constitution text or upgrade the on-chain smart contracts. And we call that a constitutional AIP. And the difference between the two AIPs is how many votes are required for it to pass. So for a non-constitutional AIP, it's 3% of the votable tokens need to vote yes. And for a constitutional AIP, 5% of the votable tokens need to say yes. And that's actually a very high threshold, by the way. Trying to get a constitutional AIP passed today is very hard. It's very much a Hercule effort sometimes to get that passed. So again, what is sort of under the remit of the DAO? So as I mentioned, funding related matters. The DAO has a treasury or guidelines. If you want to get some funding to do a cool project, you can submit a funding request to the DAO. Of course, at the same time, the DAO can decide to change the network configuration, Arbitrum 1, Arbitrum 2. The DAO can decide to upgrade the core smart contracts of Arbitrum, and of course, update the governance contracts itself. So one proposal that's going to go through the DAO very soon is that they're going to vote on a new suite of smart contracts to allow the DAO to elect to allow the DAO to vote on new Security Council members. And we're going to talk about that very soon. But that's one example of the governance contracts that they can upgrade or they can add on to the system. So the key point here is that the DAO can change fundamental smart contracts off the Arbitrum network for both Arbitrum 1 and Arbitrum Nova. They have a crazy amount of control over this, which no other rollup facilitates today, to the best of my knowledge. It really has been given to the DAO. I mean, the protecting the live deployment of Arbitrum has very much been given to the DAO, which to me is really exciting. So how does the voting protocol work? How do we actually go through a proposal, get it voted on, and then how does the upgrade actually occur on chain? So the voting process is outlined in the Constitution, and it's fairly straightforward. If anyone here wants to submit a proposal, you can visit the forum. There's a category for proposals, and you can submit your proposal there. I'd recommend following the template or looking at previous proposals before you submit it. Now, once you post that proposal, it has to be there for around 3 days to facilitate time for some feedback from the community. And I always recommend that, if people haven't had a chance to read your proposal or get feedback, then they're probably going to reject it. So make sure you allocate enough time for feedback. 2, this is optional, but you can put the proposal on Snapshot for a temperature check. And then the delegates can look at your proposal and then they can vote on it and give you an indication whether it will pass or not. And again, that's recommended because Snapshot's free. It doesn't cost any money to cast your vote, and it only lasts a week. And you can get a rough idea if it's going to pass without wasting anyone else's time. Then, of course, let's say the temperature check passes. You're doing very well, and you're very excited for this proposal to actually pass. What you will do then is that you can visit a website like Tally, and you can submit your proposal directly to the governance smart contracts on Ethereum, on Arbitrum 1. And so at this stage, your proposal will be submitted to the governance smart contracts in Arbitrum 1, and it will use the on-chain voting mechanism to allow all the delegates to vote on your proposal. Tally is like a user interface to do that. So Tally has a really pretty website that makes it really easy to read the proposal and cast your vote. But all the votes occur on chain. And so there's a small fee that you have to pay for that. But it runs in Arbitrum 1, so the fees aren't that bad, actually, which is really nice. I think it's like a few pennies. But basically, you still have to cast your vote. That will last for about 14 days or 17 days because there's a waiting period just before that. Now, let's just say you're successful. What are the next steps when a proposal successfully passes the voting stage? I'm sure everyone here would love that to happen. I'm always excited to see a proposal pass. So the next steps. The first step is that remember, all of this is happening on chain. So this is basically the high-level overview of how the smart contracts work for governance. But basically, once the on-chain vote is successful, you will then trigger it. You'll send a transaction and trigger the next step, which is basically a time lock on Arbitrum 1. And what this really does is enforce a 3-day waiting period. And the reason why we have a 3-day waiting period or a safety lock is, one, we want to provide time for users to withdraw their funds. Like, let's just say there's an upgrade that's been accepted by the DAO, but as a user, you don't like the upgrade, you don't trust it. There's several waiting periods incorporated that will provide you enough time to unwind your positions in Arbitrum and then withdraw your funds out. So you just have the right to leave and exit if they disagree with an upgrade. A second reason is that if the proposal is malicious, let's just say the governance has been hijacked and the DAO submits a proposal that's bad for the network. That's, for example, steal everyone's funds, or maybe they just don't pass compliance. That says a funding request and they can't do KYC, for example. Then the Security Council can step in and veto the proposal and cancel it. So we have this idea of a Security Council that should review every proposal going through the DAO. And if they're convinced that this is malicious or breaks the rules or breaks the Constitution, they can veto it and stop it. So who are the Security Council members? How do they get picked and why do we care about them? So first, the Security Council members made up of 12 members. I only have 10 hands. I don't know why I'm using my fingers. Or show 10 fingers. We have 12 of them, so 12 Security Council members. And every 6 months, a new cohort will be elected to replace 6 of the members. So the next Security Council elections are scheduled for September. And we'll hopefully talk about that in a second anyway. So every 6 months, hopefully there will be an on-chain voting process where anyone can cast their vote and decide who should join the Security Council. Okay, there'll be a whole election process for that works on chain. Hopefully, fingers crossed, because the DAO has to approve that as well. They have to approve that upgrade for the Security Council elections, and that's going through the works now. So assuming they do pass that, then we'll have an on-chain election for this. But what can they do? What are their powers? So the first power is that if 9 out of 12, if 9 of the members collectively work together, they can veto any proposal. Again, if 9 of the members cooperate, they can also perform an emergency upgrade on the network. Let's just say there's a DevOps 199. I don't know if anyone knows that reference. If you don't, I would Google it afterwards. DevOps 199. Let's say there's a DevOps 199 who finds a bug that could freeze the entire system and freeze all the assets on Arbitrum. Now, if they were to submit the bug to us and we agree to say this is a critical bug that has to be fixed ASAP no matter what, then the Security Council members can collectively upgrade the network and fix the bug. And that'll take immediate effect if 9 of them work together. Now, if they were to do this, you can imagine there would be very much a security report being released shortly afterwards to explain why they had to take this emergency action. This is a superpower that isn't taken lightly. And then finally, for non-emergency upgrades, so the Security Council members, according to the Constitution, they have a remit to do periodic software upgrades. That's to say there's some non-critical bugs that need to be fixed because they annoy everyone. The Security Council members could simply, via 7 of them, could approve an upgrade. In that case, it takes about 2 weeks for that upgrade to eventually be processed and to impact the on-chain smart contracts. Again, to give people time to withdraw their funds if they're not happy with that upgrade. But that's the Security Council in a nutshell. You know, there are 12 members and they get replaced every 6 months. Well, 6 of them get replaced every 6 months. So every Security Council member has a 1-year term. But anyway, in this case, they don't stop the upgrade. They're happy. Proposal passed. There's no issue with the proposal. It's not malicious. It's not trying to attack the system. So they allow it to go through the 3-day time lock. So after 3 days, what happens next? So the first type of proposal that could be passed is called a no-op operation. So this could be like, you know, guidelines, for example. So if people are voting on a code of conduct, then in this case, it gets emitted as an event because there's no on-chain action to take, but we just need to record that it happened. So it would be like an on-chain event. And in this case, for AIP 1.1, we had a no-op operation that basically to acknowledge that AIP 1.1 had passed. So that could be the action that happens on-chain. The second action could be, this could be a funding request and the user gets their funds. So Questbook, they had their grant proposal. They had their proposal. So Questbook submitted a grant framework proposal to the DAO. It was approved by the DAO, and they got transferred the funds 2 days ago, and it was sent directly from the DAO treasury, just like this example. So that's really cool. You know, the foundation's not a middleman. You know, we're not here to, you know, transfer the funds to you. It comes directly from the DAO. So that's really exciting. But now, what about the one maybe a lot of people care about? What if you want to upgrade the on-chain smart contracts? What are the next steps for that type of proposal? And people call this a round trip. And I don't really know why I have Mr. Bean there. He looks a bit like he's having a round trip. I don't really know why he's there. But the whole point of the idea of a round trip is that the proposal is voted on. So all the token holders, they will vote on the proposal on Arbitrum 1. But in order to upgrade the smart contracts, we have to work out which smart contracts have to be upgraded. They could be on Arbitrum 1, Arbitrum Nova, or Ethereum. And so any request to upgrade the smart contracts will always be sent to Ethereum first. Okay, we're going to see how that works now. Okay, so let's assume on Arbitrum 1, we've finished the time lock. You know, the 3-day period has passed. Security Council has not vetoed this, and we want to upgrade the on-chain smart contracts. In that case, a message will be sent from Arbitrum 1 to Ethereum with the details of the upgrade. And that has to go through the Arbitrum bridge. And because it's an optimistic rollup, there's a 7-day waiting period before that message can be sent from Arbitrum 1 to Ethereum. But after 7 days, the message is sent to Ethereum. It's with the Arbitrum bridge on Ethereum. And now there's another 3-day waiting period. Again, the point of this 3-day waiting period is to allow users to withdraw their funds, or 2, maybe the Security Council wants to stop it on Ethereum. They have another opportunity to stop the proposal. After 3 days, it can no longer be vetoed, and the smart contract can be upgraded. But the question is, what are we upgrading? What's the target for the upgrade? So the first example is maybe we want to upgrade the bridge on Ethereum. We want to upgrade the smart contracts that live on the Ethereum network. So the message doesn't have to go anywhere. It would just upgrade the smart contracts that live on Ethereum immediately. You know, it executes on Ethereum. Maybe you want to upgrade, the governance smart contracts that live in Arbitrum 1. In that case, the upgrade message has to go from Ethereum back to the Arbitrum 1. And that's sort of the round trip. We had to go from Arbitrum 1 to Ethereum. Now we're going back from Ethereum to Arbitrum 1. But in this case, we send the message up to Arbitrum 1, and then the upgrade can occur. And it will upgrade all of the smart contracts that need to be changed and that live on Arbitrum 1. Maybe it's Arbitrum Nova. Maybe there's a smart contract in Arbitrum Nova that you want to upgrade. The message goes from Ethereum to Arbitrum 1, and then it executes in Nova. But of course, maybe you want to upgrade smart contracts in all 3 networks. So for example, after the Security Council election, there's 3 Gnosis safes on Arbitrum 1, Ethereum, and Nova that all have to be updated at exactly the same time. And so you may have to send a message to both Arbitrum 1 and Nova and then execute the upgrade on Ethereum as well. So that's cool. That's how the on-chain governance smart contracts work for an upgrade. Now, my colleague Chris, well, my old colleague, he works at Off-Chain Labs. We had a startup together back in the day. He had this diagram to explain on-chain governance smart contracts. And the first time I looked at it, I was really confused. I'm like, this is a terrible diagram. Now that I look at it, I'm like, oh, I understand it now because I understand how it works. But again, it's not it's not a good introduction to the smart contract suite anyway. But funny enough, another person called Henry asked what tool he used for the diagram because he thought it was an awesome diagram. And I think this is very sus, very suspicious. Some collusion going on here because there's no way that's a good diagram. But oops. But anyway, but that's just a joke about the diagram because it's a very, very accurate but difficult to read diagram. So I think my slides are a little better. Just for people who want to have a giggle out there. But anyway, so far, what's the DAO done? We've talked about, we've talked about voting protocols. We talked about governance. We talked about, how the on-chain governance smart contracts work. Has any of this actually been used? Have we actually voted on proposals? And we have. So AIP1 was rejected. That was the very first proposal that the foundation submitted, and the DAO rejected us. That's a great way to start relationship, isn't it? It's like, oh, guys, here's the framework, and then they rejected us. I don't know. Anyway, I think it was awesome that they did it. They really set the tone for our relationship between the foundation and the DAO. They outright rejected it. Another proposal was also rejected called AIP 1.05. But then after that, there's been 3 proposals that have passed. Actually, no, that's wrong. I need to update this diagram. 5 proposals have passed. The foundation's budget was passed. The framework for the DAO was passed. Alchemy submitted a proposal to add a new JSON RPC to the sequencer. That was passed. And now there's 2 grant frameworks, one by Questbook and another by Plurality Labs. That's also passed. And then there was one that failed on Snapshot and never made it to tally, but I don't have any more space on the diagram. I can only fit, I guess, seven proposals there. But as you can see, the DAO is very active. They're very much writing proposals and going through the entire process to vote for them. I mentioned already, Questbook have received their funds. Plurality Labs, the final proposal there, they should hopefully receive their funds in about a week. They're still going through the tally process, but the proposal's passed. So that's cool. So my shout out to anyone here is that get involved with the Arbitrum DAO. You can write proposals, you can add feedback to proposals, you can actively get involved. And clearly people are using this system. So it's not just me saying that you should do it. There's actually people doing this every day. I'm actually quite surprised how active the forum is. I'm very excited to go on it every day and see a couple of new posts because people are actually taking this very seriously. What about the relationship between the DAO and the foundation? I work at the foundation, I help the DAO, and of course, how should we interact with each other? So what's really important to highlight is that, as I mentioned, the DAO rejected AIP1. They rejected our initial proposal for setting up the DAO and funding the foundation. They had every right to do that. What the DAO wanted to ensure was that the foundation was accountable to their mission statements. So in the end, AIP 1.1, it gives the funding to the foundation, but it comes in a vesting wallet. So our treasury gets released to the foundation over a period of 4 years. It continuously vests. And the DAO maintains the authority to accelerate, slow down, or remove that vesting period altogether. So if the DAO is not satisfied with our progress on our mission statements, they can come together and vote to punish us. Or if we do very well, they can also treat us very well as well. The DAO retains that control, which is really important. And of course, our mission statements, like what should the foundation actually be doing? So we focus on technical advancement. So that's could be implementation, it could be research. The second is strategic partnerships and grants. So we're focused on trying to get, large companies like the Reddit example, because Reddit used Arbitrum. Our job is to try to get these large strategic partnerships to build on top of Arbitrum. And then finally, educational initiatives, a bit like this talk. Our job is to teach people, why is a DAO useful? Why is Ethereum useful? Why is DeFi useful? Why do we care about this technology? It's really trying to onboard people to Ethereum and Arbitrum as much as we can. And of course, I'll be leading that effort in my mind, for education, is to provide factual information so people can learn about why this technology is really exciting, but also to provide enough information to the DAO to make informed decisions. We can provide them with the pros and the cons of a technical proposal. Let's say MEV. They're going to decide on something. What are the benefits and the repercussions? And to do that in a way that's factual and allows them to really make a good informed decision. That's a big part of the educational initiatives. And I'm really excited to get that started, by the way, because very excited by this technology. I'm always excited by it. Anyway, but we're accountable to our mission statement. That's what we really care about. Now, what about the relationship between the DAO and the foundation? As I mentioned earlier on in this talk, in my mind, the DAO is the brain and we're the hands. The DAO is required to make important decisions about the future of Arbitrum, and our job is to help them execute on that. So if they make a decision, it's up to us to do our best effort to facilitate that. So maybe one example is the DAO decides they want a service provider to come on board to help run a critical part of the network. Then our job as the foundation to set up the SLAs and the service level agreements with that service provider and actually make sure they they deliver on behalf of the DAO or what they promised the DAO. So one is, we do KYC, we do SLAs, we do whatever we can to facilitate whatever the DAO decided on. It could even be, it could be anything, whatever the DAO really decides. It's really, really up to them. But what's also really important is that it's up to the foundation to be a neutral party in the DAO. So if someone submits a proposal to the DAO, we will not endorse it. Our job is to be Switzerland. We want to provide a neutral position so we can help facilitate and steward the DAO. Ideally, at least what we're trying to achieve is to foster this environment where people feel like they can write a proposal to the DAO, get it through the voting process, take ownership of it, and run with that proposal. And it's our job as a steward to help the DAO achieve that and help the community feel like they can do that as well. So you're not like a bystander. You're an active participant in this community. And if you want, you can very much run with any proposal that you want, and we're here to assist you with that. But we can only do that if we're neutral. It's not about picking favorites. We don't pick favorites. It's just helping the DAO actually facilitate proposals. And then finally, the Arbitrum Constitution, I like to think of that as an API for engagement between the DAO and the foundation. So if the DAO wants to set up a new formal channel to the foundation that doesn't exist, they can update the Constitution, and that acts like our API access. They can define the rules for how we engage with the DAO. And that's really cool. You can't do this with Coca-Cola. If I say to Coca-Cola, oh, I want you to do this is how I want you to work with us, they're just going to tell me to go away. But with the foundation, you can just submit a proposal to the DAO, and then everyone can work together to vote on it, and then we adhere to that new API access. So again, hands in the brain. Our job is to be neutral as much as we can, and of course, the Arbitrum Constitution really defines the relationship between the DAO and the foundation. So the whole point is that we're working together because we care about making Arbitrum the best ecosystem possible. On Ethereum, what's very important, and one of the reasons why I joined the foundation, was that the Constitution clearly specifies we're Ethereum aligned and Arbitrum aligned. It's not just about helping Arbitrum, but helping Ethereum as a whole. I think that's very important to highlight. Now, one thing I love to highlight, and I hope people here take this very seriously. So as a bystander, it's really easy to look at an organization and say, oh, the foundation's not doing a good job. I could do a better job. Come on, foundation, get your act together. Or maybe you're sitting there thinking, oh, why is the foundation not doing X, Y, and Z? I think these are really important issues, and the foundation's completely ignoring that. Well, if that's you, then you can submit a proposal to the DAO, get it funded. You can even pay yourself as well. Part of these proposals is that here's a proposal for the operation, and here's a proposal to fund yourself to do it. You could get funded to go do something that you care about. If we're not doing a good job of it, or it's an issue we're not looking at, you can fund yourself to do it. And if the other delegates agree, you run with it. and you become like an extension of us. And then you actually just go and do the proposal that you really care about. And I think that's really, really exciting, because now people can work on proposals and they can kickstart initiatives that they really care about. Again, you can't do this with Coca-Cola. You know, I may think their drinks are crap, but they're not going to listen to me. I can't join their org. I can't convince them to fund me. But you guys can do that. Submit it to the DAO and just do a better job than us. I think that's a great outcome. You know, because I think what's really important about that is, if people are unhappy about how we're doing it and they really truly believe they can do it better and they get funded and they do it better than us, you're really finding people who are like mission aligned, who really care about it and they really want to run with it. And it's very difficult to hire for that. So hopefully this will provide the process to allow people to step up and actually do that. And then again, we're there to support them as much as we can. So yeah, what's coming up? You know, that's sort of an outline of Arbitrum Governance. So, you know, I got to advertise this as an ex-professor. You know, Arbitrum has an ambassador program. I believe there's like a small pot of money. So if you want to run an Arbitrum event somewhere in the world, you can apply to the ambassador program. And if you get accepted, you can run events on behalf of Arbitrum on Ethereum. And I believe the foundation can help fund some of those events as well. But I highly recommend, if you want to, you know, join an ambassador program and help spread the word of Web3, I just highly recommend looking at that program and applying, especially if you're like a community leader and you want to run meetups. Another one this is actually on Snapshot now. So as I mentioned before with Security Council members, there's currently a work in progress that we've sponsored of an implementation. So basically the Constitution outlines, the Arbitrum Constitution outlines how the Security Council members should be elected, but there's no implementation. And so we've sponsored work to implement that part of the Constitution. Off-Chain Labs and Tally are working together. So Tally's doing the user interface, Off-Chain Labs are doing the on-chain smart contracts. They're working together on the implementation for how we can elect Security Council members. That is now currently on Snapshot to be voted on. So I think the pre-audit code is ready, and we're doing a temperature check to make sure people are happy with this implementation. And then once the audit reports are ready, the DAO will then have an opportunity to vote on by the on-chain governance smart contracts on whether we should install this suite of smart contracts. So we're doing a bit of the heavy lifting now to get the implementation ready, but it's up to the DAO ultimately to decide if they want to install these smart contracts. And if they do, you know, it's going to be really cool. You know, we can replace Security Council members via an on-chain process. We don't have to worry about some dinky, you know, form method of posting on a message board and then relying on multi-sig to install it. I'm really excited by the idea we could have an on-chain smart contract process to do this. Because, you know, it's on-chain governance is actually a really important problem. And finally, the grant program. So if you're a developer working on infrastructure or tooling, I highly recommend submitting a proposal to the grant program. Because if you get funded, then it's basically, you know, basically free funds to help fund your work. You know, grant programs are awesome for doing that. Like the classic example is Uniswap. Uniswap got a $50K grant from the Ethereum Foundation to fund their audit. Their audit got funded, they launched Uniswap, and we all know what happened with Uniswap. You know, it's a fantastic project. And I'd really like to see a grantee from the Arbitrum Foundation have a similar level of success. So I highly recommend submitting to the grant program if you're very excited about working on your project. It can also be the work on a thing, the tinker of an idea that you think is interesting. But generally speaking, you know, we want us to support developers like every other ecosystem. So yeah, I highly recommend submitting it there. And maybe one caveat is that our grant program will always complement the DAO. So the DAO now will very soon have 2 independent grant programs run by Questbook and Plurality Labs. Depending on what they decide to fund, we will change our grant program to work with the DAO. Because it's very easy for us to change our grant program as opposed to the DAO trying to work out how they conflict with the foundation. So we're very flexible. So I'm very excited to see those 2 grant programs get set up and for everyone here to have an opportunity to apply to either of them. But yeah, that's a slide I keep hidden. It's to do with that previous slide on the on the constitutional AIP. So as I mentioned, you need 3% of the tokens or 5% of the tokens for one of those proposals to pass. And so I just worked out the numbers for it for a slide, but I always think it's too complicated to explain. But basically, if you go through the numbers, there's 10 million ARB tokens, 7.1 billion are excluded from voting. And so that means the total votable tokens is about 2.9 billion. And then 5% of that is about 140 million ARB. So you need 140 million ARB in order to pass a constitutional AIP. Another part of it is that even though your token's votable, it has to be delegated. It can be delegated to yourself, but it has to be actively delegated before it can be used to cast your vote. And today, when I made this slide, there was about 300 million ARB actually delegated. So for every proposal that's put to the on-chain governance smart contracts, 300 million ARB is eligible to vote. And so you need about half of that to pass a constitutional AIP. So as I mentioned, it's a very high threshold actually for voting. But yeah, there's just the numbers. I should probably put that back in the slide deck. I just had it near the end. But yeah, that's my last slide anyway. So I hope everyone enjoyed this talk. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer it.
Amazing. Patrick, thank you very much. I'm very aware that we are running out of time, but there was a question from David who asked if you could perhaps provide some more information over how the foundation is funded.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. So the way we're funded is from that vesting smart contract. So AIP 1.1 allocates 700 million ARB into a vesting smart contract. And we get that continuously over 4 years. So that's our primary source of funding.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I think we will have to wrap it up there. But if anyone has any additional questions, I'd recommend you reach out on the Discord channels and we will do our best to get those answered for you. But Patrick, thank you very much. Really amazing session, so extensive but insightful as well. Really kind of gave a lot of answers over the foundation and the DAO and how they're connected. So I'm sure everybody found that extremely useful, and it provides a lot of context for any projects which they might be looking to build. So one more reminder for the session tomorrow, your team formation session. It would be great to see you all there. And yes, just one final thank you to Patrick for a really great session. So thank you very much, and we'll see you all again tomorrow.